Okay, good. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to do this. It worked out well. Um, yeah, this was a presentation. I actually did this in 2019, and I've updated it a little bit. There's a few additions. So I previously did this at the National Convention in 2019. Um, and as you'll see, I don't really not really an expert per se, but I have a definite interest in mail and express, and so it's been a fun topic. So a little bit about mail and express trains on the PRR. They were a large profit center for railroads in general, and then for the PRR in particular. Um, the PRR carried more mail and express by a large margin than any other railroad. Um, Mail and express trains were classified as passenger trains, and that's whether or not they carried passengers. They were all, as opposed to freight trains, that they were considered passenger trains. All cars included steam and signal lines. They often carried a rider coach or a crew cabin car, which we'll talk about a little bit, for conductor and rear brakeman. And they almost always were led by passenger locomotives with steam boilers. The This 1928 ad just sort of showed, it's just a great image of the mail and express business, and this one was advertising, in 1928. I guess they had 28 bags full of dividend checks, which they were sending out. Um, so it's just a massive operation for, particularly mail, but also express. So we're going to cover just kind of four parts to the presentation. The first is operations. Then there's just a gallery in roughly in chronological order. A little bit about the crew cabin cars, and a little bit on modeling. So we'll start with operations, and um, there isn't a lot of information out there on mail and express trains, but one of the great things is the New York Makeup of Trains document, which typically there's several of these available floating around on the internet. And this, if you're not familiar with it, this was essentially the Bible. This was the daily, uh, literally, I mean, that's what it was. They were making up trains every day at Sunnyside Yard in particular in New York. And every train, every car and every train was basically listed, and with a lot of other details that I'll show you a little bit. So this was, just a document that they used every moment of every day probably as they were planning, because trains were typically, trains were broken up and put back together, and they had to have the right cars in the right order, and that's what this document was for. It lists all the trains, and so just, if you go through the document, you can, find the mail and express trains. So this is from 1952. You can just see there's a variety of trains. These are westbound mainline trains, New York to St. Louis, New York to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to Chicago, and that included cars from New England, which we'll talk about a little bit. Eastbound uh, mail and express, St. Louis to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to New York, and Pittsburgh to New York and Philadelphia. Also, mail and express trains on the corridor. There was, a lot of mail and express between New York and Washington, and intermediate stops. And so the document also highlights all these trains that were on the corridor. So New York to Washington, through train to New England, which we'll talk about, Sunnyside Yard, PXT. PXT is the Railway Express facility to Washington, New York to Philadelphia and Wilmington, and then some odd ones, this M&E Extra, uh, Sunnyside Yard in New Brunswick. I'm not sure what was going on in New Brunswick, but they had a dedicated train. Um, Eastbound on the corridor, Trenton to New York, Washington to New York, through train to New England, and Philadelphia to New York. So one of the things at the beginning of the document, it has an explanation of the symbols and characters used in the makeup of trains. So each car had a designation, and typically most of them are, they're somewhat familiar because they basically follow the car classes that we're familiar with. So M and baggage mail for mail cars, um, all listed here. The baggage cars, the B series cars, um, refrigerator R50B, and then Steel Express box cars, the X29s that were converted, and also X42. And on this one in 1952, it just happened to note they had just built the 10 really experimental X42 cars and 60-foot steel box car, express box cars, and they had a note here on it that these cars are now in service. So a lot of detail that you can pull out. So then when it comes to each train, so each train here is shown. This is the train 11 St. Louis Mail, New York to Pittsburgh and St. Louis with cars to Kansas City, Texas, and Los Angeles. And you can see here, so this is the consist. This is every car. Um, and you can see there that the train leaves New York at Penn Station at 12:01 a.m. and it arrives in Pittsburgh the following day at 10 p.m. So it has some schedule information. Say each car is highlighted, and a lot of detail. So if you're modeling a train, you can use this really to build your consist. Um, M60 was a designation. They were typically B60 baggage cars, but they could be other things too. But they had 60 feet of space apparently. And also the uh, R50 or X29, as you can see going down. And then the other one, the Express B60, and it has messenger. So that one is a messenger equipped car, and it notes the gold star on the side. And then at the bottom, this train, as many trains had some kind of a rider coach, uh, or in some cases, it was just a crew cabin car. And the rider coaches, as we'll see, sometimes they carried passengers and sometimes they did not. And so Express was pretty much a national, uh, you know, business. They were packages and mail was sent, all the way across the country. This just happens to be a diagram of the fast mail on Santa Fe's fast mail, which was fed by both the Pennsy and New York Central and the New Haven, also from Boston and New England. Here's train 13, the New York Pittsburgh Express. And this, I believe, this train had three coaches, um, but it was, it left New York at 3:45 a.m. and it arrived at Pittsburgh. It was basically a early morning, and then arrival at Pittsburgh at 4:15 p.m. Um, And you can see here, the first car, this MS-60, it was only going as far as Harrisburg, so it was dropped off and taken off the train at Harrisburg. Um, it picked up a car in Newark, apparently, so there was a car that Newark to Pittsburgh, and I'm not sure. I'm kind of curious how. I don't think they did a whole lot of switching in Newark, but that's what it says. And the only other thing is that they could have sent the car from Newark to Sunnyside and then put it in the train there. But I don't know if that something that they did. Um, there's a car from New Haven, MS-60, mail storage 60-foot, and from New Haven to Pittsburgh, and it came off of train 183 on the New Haven. So it has the sort of the connecting information there. Also, the next car was Meriden to Pittsburgh, and again, this came coming off the same train. And some of these trains also carried RPOs. And so this next one, this BM70, which had a 30-foot mail compartment, was going to Pittsburgh, and it has this designation LEE, which stands for letter end eastward. So they wanted the car oriented in a particular direction, which is interesting because they have to either find a car in Sunnyside Yard that is in the right direction, or figure out a way to turn it, because uh, it's not easy to turn cars as needed. This is Train 93. They had dedicated trains for Railway Express Agency, and this was titled Railway Express Agency. And typically, these were dedicated strictly for express. And so the entire train was probably operated, from Railway Express Agency cars and shipments. And these trains in particular did not carry passengers. But all the detail is here. And one of the interesting things, this first car here is an R50B with milk, Sunnyside Yard. So I assume that's sending back the empty, or the after it came, brought milk to New York. Sunnyside Yard to Salamanica, New York, via train 527 at Harrisburg. So at Harrisburg, it was switched out and sent on its way to Salamanica. But it's interesting that, the Pennsy probably wasn't carrying a lot of milk, but they actually had a dedicated car here. Also, it notes just other destinations: Dayton, Birmingham, Cincinnati. So these cars were, switched out typically. So these cars connected with train 205 in Pittsburgh. So these cars came off at Pittsburgh, and they were sent on their way in train 205 into Ohio.
So,
Go ahead.
Sorry, Doug, just a quick question. Do you want to keep questions to the end, or are you okay answering questions as we go along?
I'm okay if there's a particular thing that's relevant to what's up at the moment, so that's okay.
There was a question about why Akron was crossed out and an additional notation was made there.
Oh, yeah, I'm not quite reading that. I don't know. It may have been a correction. I think that, I don't know, does that say Columbus? It's a little hard to see. But I'm not sure. These documents, I don't know, so this was dated September 28th, 1952. I don't know how often they revised these, but I would think that was probably, every 3 months or so, they probably came out with a new one as traffic needed changes. But it's amazing though how much planning and pre-set that these schedules were done. And of course, they were making assumptions on loads and how much mail and how much express during these periods. So I'm sure that there were changes that they had to make occasionally as traffic changed.
All right, thank you.
This is a great photo of the PXT facility in Sunnyside Yard, and it's now gone with all the redevelopment that they did. But you used to be able to see it, at least the I remember when I was younger, you could see it was the shell of a building, but it was still there. Um, but this is an interesting photo, and I particularly like Railway Express vehicles, and it's just this. You look at these vehicles, it looks like no two vehicles are the same. So Railway Express, they were kind of not fleet consistency was not an important thing to them. So they seem to buy all kinds of trucks. There's so many different varieties here. I'm sure there's a few duplicates, but you look down the line and everyone is a little bit different, or so it seems. So it's just very interesting. Uh, Also, the little plan on the inset there, you can see there were tracks. There were, I think these are 6 tracks that actually went into the building. So they did the transfer, from the cars and then into the trucks, all protected from weather. And these are just some of the tracks outside, where you can see here, and there's some of the crew cabin cars, which were assigned and lettered for Railway Express Agency. And there are some express cars. There's a Pacific Fruit Express reefer, and looks like that's an R50 right adjacent to it. So here's this is number 95. Again, it was called Railway Express Agency.
There was a quick comment here that the second car in looks like it could have been an R60.
Oh, this one here? Yeah,
Yeah, the Pensy R60.
yeah. I think the one here to the
Yeah.
right, that's the end of an R50, but yeah. So this is where, we don't really know, don't have some details, but there's an interesting thing of just how did these trains operate. So this train included through cars from New England, continuing on to Pittsburgh, and actually and beyond. So a lot of these cars here, you can see PXT to Harrisburg, Chicago, Columbus, Cincinnati, San Antonio, Indianapolis. But then here, this next set, Boston to Indianapolis, Hartford to St. Louis, Providence to St. Louis, South Norwalk to St. Louis, um, South Norwalk to Chicago, and on and on. But what the interesting thing is how these trains were put together. Now, typically trains were put together in Sunnyside Yard, but I don't think in this case I don't think that this is possible. As we have some other photos of this kind of train, but um, it was not really possible when trains came from New England across the Hellgate Bridge. There's no way for those cars or trains to get into Sunnyside Yard. You really have to, unless you do a backup move across the entire busy, extremely busy railroad, just to the west of Sunnyside Yard, and then back in, which I don't think that they would have done. But so a little bit of a mystery just how these trains were put together. I'm going to assume, my assumption is because the trains actually went into Penn Station, and then the cars that came from New England, the rest of the train was put together in Penn Station as opposed to at Sunnyside Yard. But that's just sort of my assumption of how the easiest way that they would do that. Of course, uh, Penn Station was relatively restricted in the number of tracks and the amount of trains, and so it couldn't tolerate a whole lot of switching. But um, it's interesting that this train, but it was an early morning train, so it left New York at 6 a.m. I'm not sure what it has sort of two. It says 6 a.m. and then 6:20. So I'm not sure, but early morning. So I guess they could put it together uh, basically in the night before. And anyway, it's just an interesting operational question of just how that would work. Um, here's train 107, the New York Washington Mail, and this train apparently did not take it did have P-70s, so it did take passengers. And in fact, it had uh, 11 uh, coaches continuing on to Washington. This is a train, and it left New York at 1:10 a.m. and arrived. So it's basically an overnight train. So and it did not carry sleepers. There were other trains that carried sleepers, but this train was 8 coaches only, or sorry, 11 coaches, um, and overnight train, and it had a leisurely 6 hour and 20 minute schedule. So it was definitely not a fast train. Um, Train 162, and just sort of an interesting thing here that this one had an X-25, um, which was a dedicated battery boxcar, I believe, but it must have been equipped with passenger equipment. So this went to Wilmington, and which was the electric shops, and it carried batteries. And I believe what this is, again, I'm speculating here, but batteries were commonly switched out of passenger cars, and that's something that would have happened at Sunnyside. And batteries were then sent to Wilmington, the electric shops, where I assume the batteries were, refurbished or whatever that work they had to do on them. Also of interest, this train had a New Haven uh, RPO car that went all the way through. It wasn't too typical for RPOs, to cross. Mostly they stayed on property, but in this case, this New Haven full RPO went on, continued on in this, at least to Philadelphia, or from Philadelphia. Another Railway Express train, cars from Boston, bound for Pittsburgh, and they would be attached to the Metropolitan in Pittsburgh, to New York, to St. Louis, rather. And also included cars from Boston to southern destinations, Atlantic Coastline, Seaboard Airline, and Southern. And this train, in this case, the New Haven also had crew cabin cars, and this one notes that it's carrying 2 crew cabins, Boston to New York and Boston to Washington, and they were New Haven express cabins, or I guess they would have been cabooses, but since this is a Pensy document, they called them cabins. Another Railway Express agency, and this one included a rider coach. And I haven't looked up, you'd have to look up in the public timetable to see if this actually was listed and carried passengers, or if that rider coach was only there for crew. Here's another train 251, New York to Philadelphia and intermediate stops. So this is the battery boxcar, the X-25, going to the Wilmington shops. So this is the same service in the other direction, bringing refurbished batteries back to Sunnyside Yard from Wilmington shops. Again, here's another. In this case, it lists train 180, but it's a New Haven train. So this is from New York eastward to New England. And these cars are all, this train originated in New York and went to on the New Haven all the way, cars to Boston, Providence, New London, Hartford, Meriden, Waterbury, and Bridgeport. So here's a public timetable from 1953, and you can see in this case some of the trains, they're just labeled as Mail and Express. You know, trains, these are numbered. This is the same train. It's a Sunday only and a Sunday or except Sunday, um, daily except Sunday, and then Sunday only. So it operated on a slightly different schedule um, on the 2 days. But this is the public timetable, so I'm assuming that if it shows up in the public timetable, that you could buy a ticket and ride on this train. However, um, you're warned here that this train carries only coaches for passengers, no dining car or Pullman service, and so if you happen to get on in New York, I think it's a over 10-hour trip to Pittsburgh, so you're on your own. But you can find Mail and Express trains in the public timetable, so we know that they were actually carrying paying passengers, some of them. Okay, now just moving on, a little bit of a gallery of photos, more or less in chronological order. I don't have an exact date, but this is labeled Adams Express train. And Adams Express was um, prior to World War I and the USRA, when the railroads were nationalized, the express companies were nationalized. And so prior to World War I, there were several express companies, Wells Fargo, Adams, American Express, um, and they all, I think Adams was the primary company that worked with the Pennsylvania on mail express traffic. Here's train Fast Mail Express, and as you can see, so this train, there are three passenger cars at the end, and then just very heavy mail and express up front in this train. Here's the same train, just another picture, 1902. Same train, West Philadelphia. A little more passenger cars and a little bit, only three in this case, only three um, head end cars. It looks like an RPO and two baggage cars. This is eastbound crossing the Schuylkill River, probably the same train. Radnor, PA, really A. This is 1908, train number 11, New York to St. Louis, and this was so 1908. Prior to this is basically preparation for the improvements that were happening in New York and access to under the tunnels into Manhattan. And this was a train. I think it was sort of promoting the new steel cars because the Pennsy had to. The wooden cars were not supposed to travel in the tunnels to New York, so all passenger cars had to be steel. And in this case, it looks like it's also a publicity photo because they have, excuse me, annotated by hand uh, the lettering on this train. Horseshoe Curve, 1914 train. And as you can see, it's basically solid baggage type cars, except for the last car, which is a combine that would have taken passengers if this was a public timetable train. And this is an interesting photo that is a little bit of a mystery. Um, it's pretty early photo, but um, I'm wondering, and I'm sure some other people could maybe have some things could date this photo, but um, the last car there is an Adams Express wood baggage express car. And as it says here, notes here, 1918 Adams Express was absorbed into American Railway Express. But what's interesting is that there's also a crew cabin car. Sorry. And one of the, as we'll talk about the crew cabin cars, these were converted for this use in starting in 1926. So to me, this photo, however, looks like it may be earlier. I'm not sure what exactly, what we're seeing here in terms of that crew cabin car, whether it was an earlier version or, but it must have had, uh, I assume that it had steam lines since it's in the middle of the consist here. But anyway, again, sometimes these photos raise more questions than answers. 1928 Mail and Express train at Horseshoe Curve, and you can see, you just look down now. Now we don't know what else is in this train, if there were passenger cars or not, but from everything you can see here, it's a pretty solid consist of Mail and Express. And by the way, it's being led by an M1, so that's kind of interesting, as those were designed for dual use. This is a favorite photo of mine. It probably, I don't know, I don't have a date, maybe 1930s or 40s. Um, it's an eastbound mail and express train at Elizabeth, New Jersey, on the corridor, under the wires, led by a steam locomotive. So, um, again, not exactly sure what the story behind this train is, but as you can see, this is definitely a solid, mail and express train. And the final car there at the end is a PBM 70. So it's Pensy had a few of these, but they weren't very popular. But you can pretty much see the consist here. So X29, B60B, X29, probably a B60, X29, and then the PBM 70. So nice size train to model, and just interesting that it's on the corridor, but with a steam locomotive. Train number 11 in Ohio, and you can again just see the long line of mostly baggage cars. And this is that same photo in the cover shot. So this is 1946 eastbound at Monon Tower, coming off the Panhandle line, about to go onto the Panhandle Bridge, crossing the river into Pittsburgh. Again, this is also a nice, sort of a nice size train that you could model. It looks like it's mostly B60Bs, maybe a B60, right? That there's a baggage car right behind Monon Tower that you can just see part of. And it's a little hard to tell, but it's probably a rider coach on the end of the train. K4 up front. Train number 11, the St. Louis Mail, 1947. Tower in Columbus. 1947, Lewistown. And this is a wonderful J.J. Young photo. Again, on the Panhandle heading into Pittsburgh with who knows we don't know what this train was, but it's got an R50B up front. And this is westbound train 95 at Horseshoe Curve. And this is that Boston to Pittsburgh Mail and Express with double-headed T1s on the front. Working hard, going up the grade here. 1949 in Wilkinsburg. Lots of B60Bs up front. That may be a R50B, and this is the fourth car. Eastbound coming off the Rockville Bridge. 1950. Here's train 95, 25 cars, Alagrippus curve. Triple headed. Probably the first locomotive is a helper that was added in Altoona, but who knows? Train 205, Mingo Junction. And again, this is a nice solid X29s, B60B, more X29s, B60B. Get an idea of the consists, in addition to what you see in the makeup of trains. Somewhere on the Pittsburgh division, 1950s. And I think that first car actually is a converted troop sleeper. After World War II, at some point they were deemed surplus, and a lot of them were converted for baggage and express use. And I think that's what this car is. Another J.J. Young photo. Reefer up front, probably an R50B behind it. Not sure where this location is. Somebody may know. I'm not sure. There's a big tower or something, or a smokestack. I don't know if that, and a water tower. I don't know where this is, but a nice solid consist of Mail and Express with a rider coach at the end. This is if you could only get a photo like this today. I don't even think you can get to this location today on Horseshoe Curve. But John Krause did this in the 1950s. 30-car westbound Mail and Express, and with the J1 pushing on the rear. Again, you can see the mix of, lots of B60Bs, X29s, looks like an R50B in there. Columbus, Ohio, a set of Alco PAs. And so this is an interesting photo from that discussion of how they dealt with the New Haven trains that came off. So in my mind, what's going on here, and this is an L6 electric locomotive, which I think by the 1950s were no longer in use on mainline. And so I'm going to assume that this was a locomotive that they were used in switching in Sunnyside, and also transferring cars from Sunnyside to Penn Station. So my assumption is with this photo that these are cars that were in Sunnyside Yard that are basically being taken into Penn Station, where they will be joined. The train will actually be built in Penn Station. So another, cars from New England coming off of the New Haven will go directly into Penn Station. And then those cars are added to these cars to make the train that continues on to Philadelphia and or Washington. And this train is also interesting. The first car is, I think that's an R50B. The second car is another one of those converted troop sleepers. In this case, it's a New Haven uh, converted troop sleeper. The third car is a Railway Express Agency steel reefer, and the fourth car here looks like a PRR horse car, a B74, I think, the class. So just an interesting photo that, a lot of things, we don't really know a lot of the answers, but we can speculate what's going on here. And I suspect that these are cars from Sunnyside going into Penn Station, where they will be joined with other cars from New England. 1950s Horseshoe Curve, nice color shot. And you can see, this car, this one of the cars. I don't know. Are you seeing my cursor? Not sure if you're seeing my cursor or not, but
Yes, yeah, we're seeing it.
okay. So this car, you can see it has a different paint scheme, and I'm not sure. This might be Missouri Pacific or some other foreign road baggage car in the consist. Don't have a location for this. Probably somewhere in the middle division. And this is probably the same shot, the same location, both photos by J.J. Young. And this is just interesting because here's a crew cabin in the middle of the consist. So I don't know. It's probably one of the Railway Express trains. And a crew cabin in the middle. It's Mount Union, and here's an RPO, and it looks like it has just grabbed. This train is, I assume this is probably an eastbound, but it's just grabbed a bag of mail off of the stanchion there, where the canvas bags were hung to be hooked by the RPO, and you can just kind of see the hook on the RPO, and the bag looks like it's behind the stanchion, but it's just grabbed it. Here's a photo from Federal Street Tower in Pittsburgh, and just again of interest, other than the beauty of this photo and the architecture and the signal bridges, there's the Missouri Pacific Line's baggage car. So this is a train. I assume this is a train headed to St. Louis, but I'm not sure if that is correct with Federal Street Tower. I'm not that. Does anybody know where in Pittsburgh this is? I meant to look it up ahead of time, but I'm not sure if this is on the Panhandle or not. Most times, a Missouri Pacific baggage car would be headed to St. Louis or from St. Louis. Here's a set of centipedes, Mail and Express train on Horseshoe Curve. Downgraded Mail and Express service. Just have a listing of this. Says Ohio, 1952. It's like a long string of X-29s in this train.
Hey, Doug, just a quick note. A couple times, sometimes when you're talking a little bit lower, it seems like the mic is having trouble picking you up. So
okay, I'll try and speak up. Let me know if you have any problem. Here's John Prophet photos, and the just the interesting thing here is it's a beautiful set of EMD E8s, but they are in dark green locomotive enamel 5-stripe. Um, and this is dated 1953. I don't think the E8s were in that paint scheme for very long. It's bound at slope. Here's a Philip Hastings photo at Horseshoe Curve. And again, you can just, we can assume that this entire train is mail and express. And here we're seeing the rear end of the train behind the locomotive on the other side of the valley. And you can see the rider coach and two, I assume those are, I don't know, GP7s, helpers on the rear. 1955. Another set of centipedes, Lewis Tower. Westbound at Lewis Tower. And here's westbound train number 9 at Altoona, 1957. And just of interest in this photo is the first car behind the locomotives is a Santa Fe horse car. Westbound train at Duncannon. Nice shiny paint job of this E8. And here, 1960s eastbound at Newark, crossing, it's just left Newark Station, headed to Penn Station, GG1 with B60s. And here, 1953, this is eastbound at Harold Sunnyside Yard, and it's a New Haven EP3. And so this one, just of interest, operationally, again, I'm not sure what happened here, but in 1953, the New Haven engines, I think, were actually going directly into Penn Station. Some trains, they actually put on Pennsy locomotives at Harold. My spelling there is wrong. It's Harold. Too many L's. But Harold Tower is the interlocking here. So this is a train just passing Sunnyside Yard in the background. Manhattan is, you can see in the distance, and it's just left Penn Station, and it's heading to the Hellgate Bridge and on to New England. And here in Greenwich, Connecticut, this is a EP4 locomotive on the New Haven. And I'm not sure, but I think that first car might be a Boston and Maine baggage car. And then there's a wood reefer, it looks like. And that unique triangulated catenary on parts of the New Haven. And just to bring, a little bit in Amtrak also operated, this train was called the Fast Mail, and this train was in the passenger public schedule. So this train, as you can see, it has purpose-built Amtrak express boxcars and +1 converted baggage car, and then a rider coach at the rear. But this was a train that you could Um, I think this went from New York to Washington, but it left New York at like 3:45 a.m. I think, something like that, and headed to Washington. So this is, I guess, probably as it's getting closer to Washington. But for a while, Amtrak had a fairly robust mail and express business. Um, and and this was also exemplified in the Three Rivers train, which was their New York to Chicago. It was basically a replacement for what had been the Broadway Limited. Um, but this train became something of a joke because, as you can see, it is this is the New York to Chicago passenger train. There's two baggage cars. There's a Viewliner sleeper, and then I believe, yeah, four coaches, three Horizon coaches and one Amfleet coach. And then behind that, this is the same train. There are five of these purpose-built Amtrak Express boxcars, and then behind that are these. I believe these were called road railers, and they were truck bodies and you can see the truck wheels. They're sitting on a bogie, um, and there was no car other than the truck itself, and these were a popular thing for a while, and Amtrak used them for their mail and express business. And this train, so although it had uh, five passenger cars, plus two baggage cars, but it had another 20 or more mail and express trains, mail and express cars behind it. So this was just an interesting operation, crazy train um, operated by Amtrak. But I think at some point the host railroads, I don't know if it was Conrail or Norfolk Southern, I think they were pissed at this train um, felt like they were taking away business from the railroad. And I'm not sure, but I think the lawyers got involved and Amtrak got out of the mail and express business. And it was an interesting operation while it lasted. Okay, just a little bit. Go ahead.
Just wanted to comment real quick on the Amtrak. I don't know how true it is, but I was told that actually handling the mail freight business, the express freight business as well, went against the original Amtrak charter, which was to not compete with the freight railroads, which is, I think, you got out of that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. As I said, the lawyers got involved, and it was probably a profitable business for Amtrak, but they put a stop to it. But these trains were, these were crazy concepts, if you ask me. And this is in Johnstown, by the way, Conemaugh. Okay, just a little bit about crew cabin cars, and we have these are still a little bit of mystery. I think there's a lot more questions than answers about crew cabin cars. Um, so, the information that I have is that N5 cabin cars were started in 1926. So, as we talked about that previous photo, which really looks earlier than 1926, so there's a question mark there. Um, Cars were fitted with steam lines, so basically they were outfitted for passenger train operations. So they were outfitted with steam lines, a steam radiator for heat inside the car, high-speed trucks, AB brakes, and air signal line. The cars all had these unique four-digit numbers as opposed to other cabin cars, which I think had five digits. They were typically lettered assigned to passenger service, American Railway Express, or after 1929, that was changed to Railway Express Agency. And there is a Chuck Blardone Keystone article from summer 1996 but again, there's still a bunch of questions that I don't quite have understanding about these cars. But here's a couple of photos. This is at Sunnyside Yard, and there you can see the lettering assigned to Passenger Service Railway Express Agency. Um, the other thing is, I do not know, and this car, I do not believe that these cars had the crash posts installed as other N5s did. So I think if you're modeling these, I'm not sure if it's correct, but again, I don't have a definitive answer, but I think if you're modeling these, I don't think they're supposed to have the I-beam crash posts that were installed, retrofitted on the freight versions of the N5s. And here's a couple of drawings, and there you can see just the almost identical New Haven version. And again, so this drawing, if this drawing is correct, this drawing to me appears to not show the crash posts. Chuck included a timeline roster for these cars, and just the interesting thing again, and I don't really have an answer as to what the deal was, but from 1926 to 1936 there were 45 cabins, and then something happened in 1936. And again, I'm going to just make an assumption here. This is speculation, but this was well into the Depression, and I think that the Pennsy had probably many excess passenger cars. And so I believe they probably, this is my guess, my speculation, that they probably started using rider coaches a lot more than the cabin cars. The crews probably preferred uh, the rider coaches as opposed to the cabins. And, there was still 7 of them operating between 1936 and 1960. And then again, something happened in 1960 because in 1968 or 1960, the roster went up to 24 cars. So they, I don't know, in 1960, they were retiring many of the older passenger cars, and maybe they didn't have as many handy for, or they were too old, the P70s that they were using. So again, there's a lot of questions come up that I don't have answers to. Okay, just a little bit about modeling, and as those of you that know me, I model N scale, so I apologize, but these are all N scale photos. But this is I have a small layout. This is my layout, and I like to model Mail and Express trains. So here's a little bit of my version. This is Sherman Creek Bridge, just a little module. It's always fun to have a variety of cars. Railway Express Agency, and there's one of those Missouri Pacific baggage cars. B60B. Little Railway Express facility. And again, as I did mention that I like Railway Express trucks. B60Bs with the standard version and a messenger equipped version with the star on the side there under the Railway Express Agency. B60B, BM70, that's from the Cotto Broadway Limited set. BM70K, PB70, And this was a kit bash. And although I'm looking forward to, I believe that Broadway Limited is coming out with this in. They've already done it, I believe, in HO, and I think they're going to do this car in N scale also. And this was a fun. This X42. This was a another kit bash. As you know, as I said, it's kind of an experimental car by the railroad. Rather than doing a standard baggage car, they decided to do this as an experiment. And I believe the whole idea was that they thought they could use boxcar parts
Hmm.
a lot cheaper than making a dedicated baggage car. And so they used boxcar parts, and that was the whole point of this experiment. Um, and it did make it possible to model this car from boxcar parts. So I used two. This is from double door Intermountain boxcars kits that they offered, and so made a pretty good representation of X42. And of course, X29, many of those. There's a Texas and Pacific baggage car, Atlantic Coastline baggage car, Railway Express cars, a wood reefer, and a later steel reefer. And there's that converted troop sleeper into a Railway Express agency refrigerator, interestingly, as a refrigerator. So it actually had ice hatches. Pacific Fruit Express, those were often showed up in the Pensy trains. And, PB70 rider coach and the P70 rider coach. And there's the express cabin. As I said, bit of a quandary what to do with the crash posts on the ends. I think those are not correct. And that's the end. That's the last slide. So I hope that was of some interest. It's just sort of a topic that's of a great interest to me. So I hope you enjoyed it.
That was great, Doug. Thank you very much.
Any
Thank you very much.
questions?
I think now we'll open it up for questions.
I have a question. When did that business collapse?
The question is, when did that business collapse?
Yeah, I don't think it ever did collapse until the post office pulled all mail off of, and again, I'm not sure the date. I think it was around 1970. And so as far as the Pensy was concerned, I don't think Mail and Express ever collapsed. They were still carrying mail. They were still operating, although it was probably more limited, but they were operating RPOs and probably lots of mail storage. They carried newspapers. The express business probably, I don't know, but Railway Express. I think it was sort of later when UPS became more active. That pulled a lot of business away from Railway Express agency. But I don't know, I don't know enough about the business, but there was certainly plenty of, Mail and Express operations going on, all the way to the end of Pensy in 1968. And in fact, one of the things, passengers were definitely in decline, but Mail and Express was, I think, not so much in decline. And so in the later years, in the 1960s, the trains carried a lot more Mail and Express than they carried passengers. So the Mail and Express business, I think, kept the passenger trains going until the post office, and again, I'm not exactly certain the date, but post office pulled ended all their contracts with the railroads, and um, that directly led to a collapse of passenger trains because they were subsidized by mail.
Yeah, Doug,
And go ahead.
in 1962, I worked in the Moline post office on outgoing parcel post, and I had several RPOs and trains to load parcel post for.
Yeah,
So yeah, it was still active in 1962,
yeah,
and it was the government that took it down, but I don't know the date.
yeah. And essentially, once the post office removed uh, all of its, I guess it put everything on trucks. I'm not really sure I don't even know what they did. But once that happened, the passenger trains kind of collapsed, and that directly led to the creation of Amtrak in 1972 or 71.
Yeah, when I was in 1962, there were already
So it's,
routes called highway post offices.
Yeah,
it was mentioned here that airplanes, the first class, a lot of that went to airplanes.
yeah,
Yeah,
So, real quick, we do have a couple of things online. There was a question. When the PRR made up trains, do you think they sub offline baggage, mail storage, or express cars for the PRR type cars specified in the makeup of trains, or did these foreign cars end up in the train some other way? What other roads have you noted in PRR train photos besides Boston and Maine, New Haven, Santa Fe, and Mopac, Texas and Pacific?
um, yeah. I've collected a lot of photos, which most of which are in the presentation, and I kind of highlighted, photos that I have that show these foreign line cars, um, and you know, again, as far as what happened with the makeup of trains and how exact every train was, I mean, in the past, we've had people that worked at Sunnyside, and they could probably answer some of these questions. How faithfully did every train, were these sort of estimates, or did they actually follow the makeup of trains exactly? Um, Now, I think when, that MS-60, for instance, many cars could fulfill that, and mail storage, you know, not much, not much requirement for those cars other than they had a door. um, so many different kinds of cars could fulfill that. So, it could be a B60B. I think it could actually even be an R50B, although it's 50 feet. I think those were used for mail storage when needed. Um, and whether, I do have some photos. You can see, foreign cars in Sunnyside Yard. Um, I'm sure if they had a 60-foot Missouri Pacific car, it would fulfill that MS-60 role as needed. Um, but yet those cars, I'm sure the Missouri Pacific cars, they were kind of dedicated to the trains that went back and forth to St. Louis. So um, I don't know exactly what the rules were on that, or how they, if they paid per diem, or I don't know how that whole business part worked or didn't work. Um, but I'm sure that there was, is some flexibility in, uh, but when you see a Missouri Pacific car in a consist, I think chances are that it's heading to St. Louis, or Texas. And also the same thing for the New Haven cars. When you see a New Haven car, likely, or Boston and Maine, likely it's headed, to one of the New Haven connections. Um, so
We have another comment from Phil Sellinger. As an early era modeler, someday I'd like to learn more about the relationship between Adams Express and the PETSI, maybe much as Railway Express Agency in the later years. So I don't know if you have more information about that, but maybe that's something that Phil could touch base directly on. Outside
yeah,
of
I
a small
don't.
comment here.
I don't have a lot of information, but I just know that there were numerous express companies that existed before World War One when the railroads were nationalized and the express companies were nationalized. They were reorganized, so Wells Fargo, Adams Express, American Express, several others were organized into American Railway Express during World War One by the USRA, and then that later became Railway Express Agency. It was sort of privatized again into its own company. Um, but the railroads generally had, you know, I think they had relationships. So most like Pennsy mostly worked with Adams Express. The Erie mostly worked with Wells Fargo Express, and these were relationships that they had. I don't know if they were completely exclusive or not, but
Golly, what the heck?
So we have another comment from Joe Walder that USPS stopped using the railroads to transport mail on June 30th, 1977. The last RPO route was on Amtrak between New York and Washington.
yeah, okay.
There's also another question here. Is there a similar train makeup book for DC? Thinking about M&E service to Buffalo? Thanks.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As far as I know, I've never seen anything like that. I mean, you would think that they would have the same thing in Chicago too, or St. Louis. But
So there are multiple messages here, just repeatedly just saying thanks, Doug, for a fantastic presentation. Actually expressing that. So thank you. We do have someone here that has something to add as well.
Yeah, hi Doug. I was a fireman on RPO number 4 out of Washington. I just wanted to add a little healing factor about it. The train originated out of DC, stopped at Baltimore, Philadelphia, Newark, and New York. It handled mostly certified mail and treasury stuff for the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve. All I know is one time I was walking up alongside the train taking coffee to the head end. I looked inside one of the cars and they had Tommy guns in the corner with barrel clips. And anyhow, when we got to New York, we went to go get something to eat, and I met a couple of our guys off the RPO, and they asked me next time, if the engineer would keep it down to 70 miles an hour. So on the next trip, I got up on the cab with the engineer and said, hey, they want to keep it down to 70. And he said, well, if they wouldn't drag their feet to Philadelphia, I would, but I have a timetable. And the RPO at number 4 will come in on number 1 track because that's where the mail chutes were. And it would terminate there. And I guess the pinup crew would take the hack off, ship the hack out and put it on the other end. And then run the G around because it was summer, so I don't typically use a steamer. That's it.
Yeah, and there are a number of good articles in the Keystone on the mail service on the PRR.
Just one more thing I had. I also worked on mail 9, 10, and 11. And at that time, we were containers on flat cars. that was out without the tires, so they could use the New York Pittsburgh summer. And they came out of the Meadows yard and terminated it.
All right, any more questions?
You stop recording, Mark.
I'll just, there was that comment about, that whole car full of, certified mail. You can imagine, between New York and Washington, between Wall Street and the Fed in Washington, all, and all the financial stuff, a lot of that was, a lot of that was hard copy back then. So that was a much more, important business that, that certainly has evaporated with electronic documents now. But back then it was all paper, and as we heard, that was specific. I mean, even I'm sure that they carried a lot of other things, but they had a dedicated car for certified mail. It was interesting.
All right. Well, thank you again for a fantastic presentation. And I think we can go ahead and end it there. Thank you again. And to everyone who joined us online, thank you again for joining us. Same to those who joined us here in person today. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully all again.